The city was drowning in corruption, its streets ruled by fear. Shadows stretched long over Ironwood, not just from the towering buildings but from the crimes that lurked beneath them. People hurried home before nightfall, avoiding alleys where danger whispered. The police weren't protectors, they were puppets. The law wasn't justice, it was a weapon for the powerful. And at the top of it all sat Victor Hale. For years, he had twisted the city to his will, turning law enforcement, the courts, and even local businesses into his own personal empire. No one spoke against him because those who did disappeared. He wasn't just feared, he was untouchable. But that illusion was about to shatter. Raina Carter had spent years fighting from the shadows, gathering proof of his crimes. She wasn't a hero. She didn't believe in fairy tale justice. But she believed in truth, and she had the one thing that could finally bring Hale to his knees: evidence. Real, undeniable proof. Secret deals, hidden transactions, and names that could no longer be buried. It was all there, waiting for the right moment to strike. She knew the risks. She had seen what happened to those who crossed Hale. This wasn't just about exposing him. It was about surviving long enough to make sure the truth couldn't be buried again. The fight wasn't just about Hale, it was about a city that had been suffocating under his rule for too long. With a deep breath, she stepped forward. The battle had begun. Celine sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the city lights flickering outside her window. The weight of everything she had done pressed down on her shoulders, heavy like a chain she couldn't shake off. Ironwood was different now, quieter, safer, but that didn't mean she felt at peace. For years, she had fought in the shadows, taking down the corruption that had poisoned her city. Now, with the war finally over, she didn't know what came next. Her hands tightened into fists as memories rushed back. The threats, the losses, the nights spent wondering if she'd make it to see another sunrise. She had risked everything to bring Mercer down, to rip out the rot from Ironwood's core. And she had succeeded. But what did that leave her with? She had never done this for glory or recognition. She had done it because someone had to. Now that it was over, she felt like a soldier with no battlefield left to fight on. She stood, crossing the small apartment, feeling the silence settle around her. The city outside had moved on, but could she? The scars on her body would fade, but the ones inside, those felt permanent. As she grabbed her jacket, a quiet realization sank, and maybe she wasn't meant to stay. Maybe the fight wasn't truly over, just waiting for her somewhere else. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she was ready to walk away. Celine had thought she was prepared for anything, but she quickly realized how wrong she was. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous the game became. She wasn't just going up against street criminals, she was fighting a system designed to keep people like her from winning. Every piece of evidence she uncovered only led to more questions, more secrets buried beneath layers of deception. The people in power weren't just corrupt, they were untouchable. And yet she refused to back down. Her first major setback came when one of her informants vanished without a trace. He had promised her documents that could expose everything, but before she could get them, he disappeared. No warnings, no goodbyes, just gone. The message was clear: she was getting too close. Fear clawed at her, but she swallowed it down. If anything, this only proved she was on the right track. But doubt crept in. Was she really ready for this? Could she actually bring down something this big? As she pushed forward, the stakes grew higher. The people she cared about were suddenly in danger. The threats stopped being subtle. A break-in at her apartment. A message scrawled on her mirror in red: "Stop digging." The city's darkness wasn't just in its criminals. It was in the very foundation it stood on. But Celine had made up her mind. She wouldn't stop. No matter the cost, she was going to expose the truth. Even if it meant becoming a target herself. Celine never expected to find something this dangerous. Hidden in a stack of old case files, buried beneath layers of deception, was proof that the corruption in Ironwood ran deeper than she ever imagined. It wasn't just bribes or backdoor deals. Judges, law enforcement, and politicians were all tangled in a conspiracy that had kept the city under their control for years. This wasn't just a battle against criminals, this was a war against the system itself. She barely had time to process what she had uncovered before the consequences hit. A black car followed her home that night, its headlights burning into her rearview mirror, never getting too close but never letting her out of sight. The next morning, A note was slipped under her door, 5 simple words that sent a chill down her spine. Walk away before it's too late. But the real betrayal cut even deeper. Someone she trusted, someone she had fought beside, had sold her out. She walked straight into a trap, barely escaping with her life. That moment shattered something inside her, not just the trust she had placed in others, but the illusion that she could fight this battle without real consequences. She had 2 choices. She could disappear, let Ironwood rot, and save herself. Or she could push forward, knowing that the next mistake might be her last. She took a breath, steadied herself, and made her choice. She wasn't backing down. Celine could feel it, eyes watching her, shadows lurking where they hadn't before. Parked cars she didn't recognize sat outside her apartment for hours. Unknown numbers called her phone but never spoke. It wasn't paranoia, it was a warning. Someone knew what she was doing, and they wanted her to stop. Then came the night she couldn't ignore. She took a shortcut through an alley, the city's hum distant behind her. That's when she heard it, the scrape of a boot, the sharp intake of breath. A figure stepped from the darkness, masked and waiting. Walk away, a voice warned, low and firm. But Celine never walked away. The fight was fast, brutal. A sharp blow to her ribs sent pain shooting through her side, but she fought back, landing a hit that sent her attacker stumbling. It was enough to escape, but not without cost. She barely made it home, her side aching, blood staining her sleeve. They weren't just watching anymore. They were acting. By morning, the fear had spread. People she trusted started pulling away. Henshaw met her with a grave look, his voice quiet when he spoke. You're making enemies you can't afford, he warned. If you keep pushing, you'll be on your own. But Celine was too deep to stop now. That night, digging through the files she'd risked everything to find, she uncovered something big, evidence that could bring everything crashing down. The problem? If she used it, she'd be painting a target on her back even bigger than before. Celine had spent years gathering evidence, but now, when she was finally ready to bring everything into the light, the trap was already set. The moment she stepped into the abandoned warehouse, she knew something was wrong. The air felt too still, the silence too deliberate. Then, the doors slammed shut behind her. A group of men emerged from the shadows, their leader standing at the front with a knowing smirk. You've been busy, he said, holding up a folder, the same folder she had hidden just hours ago. They had found it. They knew everything. Celine didn't flinch. She had been in worse situations before. And you're running out of time, she countered, her voice steady. Even if you stop me, the truth is already out. The smirk disappeared. The tension in the room thickened. One of the men lunged, but Celine was faster. She ducked, striking hard and precise, sending him crashing into the crates behind him. Chaos erupted. The warehouse turned into a battleground, fists, gunfire, the sound of wood splintering under heavy blows. She fought her way to the exit, heart pounding, lungs burning. She had no time to think, only to move. Just as she reached the door, a hand grabbed her wrist. The leader stood there, his face twisted in rage. You think you've won? He hissed. This city will never change. Celine met his gaze, unshaken. It already has. Sirens blared in the distance. Red and blue lights flooded the streets. The doors burst open, and officers stormed inside. The men who had ruled the city through fear were now the ones cornered, powerless. It was over. As she stepped outside, the cold night air hit her like a wave. The city she had fought for stood behind her, damaged, scarred, but free. People would talk about this night for years. They would remember the woman who had done what no one else could. But for Celine, this wasn't about recognition. It never had been. She had won the fight, but the war? That was another story. The evidence was enough to bury him. Financial records, hidden transactions, backdoor deals with law enforcement, judges, and campaign donors, it was all exposed. Linton was arrested before the week was over. His face was on every news channel, his voice caught on recordings, selling out the very people who had elected him. His career wasn't just over, it was erased. Ironwood had suffered under his rule for too long, but now, it was finally free. The city didn't change overnight. There were no grand headlines declaring victory. But those who had lived through the worst of it could feel the difference. The streets, once crawling with criminals, carried a new energy. Fear no longer shaped people's lives. At the heart of it all, Solace Clinic stood restored, its doors open once more. Dr. Corwin Henshaw moved through the halls, tending to patients without the constant shadow of violence. The clinic had survived. It had survived because of her. Celine stood across the street, watching. She had fought for this, given everything to make sure the city could heal. But now that the fight was over, she felt like she no longer belonged. Henshaw stepped outside, meeting her gaze. "You coming in?" She looked at the clinic, the place that had once been her home. Then she shook her head. "Not today." She turned away, stepping into the streets she had nearly burned down. For the first time in years, there was no war left to fight. Just the road ahead. Celine drove for hours, the city fading behind her. The neon lights of Ironwood disappeared in her rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness of the open road. For the first time in years, she had no destination, no battle waiting for her. Just the quiet hum of the engine and a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. Peace. She pulled off the highway into a nameless town. A gas station, a rundown motel, and a small diner with flickering neon lights were all it had to offer. It was perfect. She stepped inside the diner, took a seat at the counter, and ordered a coffee. Around her, life moved at an easy pace. No whispered deals, no threats in the shadows, just ordinary people living ordinary lives. The waitress poured her coffee, offering a polite smile. Celine didn't have to scan the exits, or watch the body language of those around her. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle. For the first time in years, she wasn't a soldier, wasn't a warrior. She was just Celine.